Here is the question everyone asks about Theranos. How did a college dropout fool some of the smartest, richest, most powerful people in America out of nearly $1 billion? It is the wrong question. The people at the top were not really fooled, not in the way we imagine. The better question is darker and more useful. Why did a company that knew its core product did not work keep running the tests anyway, on real patients, for years? Theranos was founded in 2003 by Elizabeth Holmes, who had dropped out of Stanford at 19. Her pitch was simple and beautiful. A single drop of blood from a finger prick could run hundreds of medical tests, cheaply, quickly, without the needle and the vial and the trip to a lab. She wore a black turtleneck, spoke in a deep and deliberate voice, and told a story about a fear of needles and a mission to democratize health. By 2014, the company was valued at $9 billion. $9 billion, on paper, for a company whose central technology had never been shown to work. Holmes owned roughly half of it, which briefly made her, on paper, the youngest self-made female billionaire in the world. The magazines came. The magazine covers came. She was compared to Steve Jobs so often that it stopped sounding like a comparison and started sounding like a coronation. So let us go back to the real question. If the technology did not work, how did it get so far? Start with who was standing behind her. The Theranos board was not a normal startup board of tech investors and operators. It was a wall of statesmen. Henry Kissinger, George Shultz, the former Secretary of State, James Mattis, the general who would later run the Pentagon, former senators, the former CEO of Wells Fargo. It was one of the most decorated boards in American corporate history, and almost none of them had any expertise in medicine, biochemistry, or laboratory science. That was not an accident. It was the design. A board of famous names does two things. It reassures investors, because surely all these serious people did their homework, and it intimidates anyone inside the company who might think about asking hard questions. When your boss's boss is a former Secretary of State, you think twice before saying the machine is broken. Theranos was built not just as a technology company, but as a fortress of reputation. And the fortress had a culture to match. Holmes ran Theranos with a level of secrecy that was unusual even by the standards of Silicon Valley. Visitors were watched. Engineers on one side of the building were forbidden from talking to chemists on the other. Emails were monitored. The company hired one of the most feared law firms in the country and used it not against competitors, but against its own former employees. The message inside the building was clear. You do not question the vision, and you certainly do not write it down. Behind that fortress, Theranos raised more than $700 million from private investors. Notice who was missing from that list. The big venture capital firms that specialize in medical technology, the ones who actually understood diagnostics, mostly passed. The money came instead from wealthy families and individuals, people who trusted the names on the board and the story on the stage, and who did not demand to see the machine run a real test in front of them. Then came the moment the fraud stopped being a story told to investors and became a danger to ordinary people. In 2013, Theranos launched inside Walgreens stores. Wellness centers, they were called. You could walk into a pharmacy, get your finger pricked, and get real blood test results that real doctors would use to make real decisions about your health. The device was called the Edison. It was supposed to be the miracle box, the thing that ran hundreds of tests from that single drop. Here is what was actually happening inside the company. The Edison could only run a small number of test types, and even those it ran unreliably, with results that swung far outside acceptable ranges. So Theranos quietly did something that tells you everything. For the vast majority of its tests, it did not use its own revolutionary technology at all. It bought conventional, commercial blood analyzers from companies like Siemens, the same machines any normal lab uses. Then, because a finger prick produces only a tiny amount of blood, technicians diluted those small samples to make them big enough for the standard machines. And that dilution introduced errors. You were told your results came from a magic drop of blood on a magic new machine. In reality, many came from a watered-down sample on an ordinary machine it was never designed to handle. Patients received results that were flatly wrong. Some were told they might be having a miscarriage when they were not. Some got alarming readings that sent them to emergency rooms. Some got falsely clean results that hid real problems. Think about what a wrong blood test actually does downstream. A doctor does not see the machine. The doctor sees a number on a page and trusts it. A falsely high potassium reading can look like a medical emergency. A falsely low result can hide a disease that is quietly getting worse. Every bad Theranos result was a small landmine planted in a real person's medical file, and the people stepping on them had no idea the machine behind the number was broken. Now the second question. Inside a company like this, someone always knows. So why did it take so long for the truth to get out? Because the fortress was designed to keep it in. Employees were made to sign aggressive confidentiality agreements. Different teams were kept walled off from each other so no one could see the whole picture. People who raised concerns were pushed out, sidelined, or threatened by the company's lawyers. The few who spoke up learned quickly that the company would rather spend money silencing them than fixing the machine. The crack came from the inside, and it was personal. Tyler Schultz, a young Theranos employee, happened to be the grandson of George Schultz, the statesman on the board. He saw the test data. He saw results being manipulated. He raised it internally, got nowhere, and eventually took what he knew to a reporter. His own grandfather sided with the company over him. Think about what it costs a young person to blow that whistle. The reporter was John Carreyrou of the Wall Street Journal. In October 2015, he published the first investigation showing that Theranos was not doing what it claimed. The company fought back hard. It sent lawyers. It denied everything. But the wall had cracked, and other whistleblowers and regulators began to move. The federal agency that regulates medical labs inspected the Theranos facility and found serious problems, so serious that they said the lab posed immediate jeopardy to patient health. Theranos was forced to void or correct tens of thousands of blood test results. Its partnership with Walgreens collapsed. The $9 billion valuation began its fall toward zero. By 2018, the Securities and Exchange Commission charged Holmes and the company's president, Sunny Balwani, with massive fraud. Theranos dissolved that same year. The fortress of reputation was empty. The famous names quietly stepped back. The investors were wiped out, and the patients were left with results they could no longer trust. In 2022, Elizabeth Holmes was convicted on 4 counts of defrauding investors. She was sentenced to more than 11 years in prison. Balwani was convicted separately and sentenced to a similar term. The comparison to Steve Jobs, the turtleneck, the deep voice, the coronation on magazine covers, all of it ended in a federal courtroom. So return one last time to the real question. Not how she fooled everyone, because in the end the smartest money in medicine never bought the story. The real question is why a machine that did not work was allowed to touch real patients for years. And the answer is that Theranos sold something more powerful than a blood test. It sold the feeling of certainty, wrapped in famous faces and a founder who looked the part. People do not audit a story that flatters them. They audit a story that scares them. That is the pattern worth remembering, because it is not unique to Theranos. Whenever a company surrounds a shaky product with an unusually impressive wall of reputation, ask why the wall needs to be so tall. The next teardown on burn rate is a company that did the opposite. Toys R Us was not a fraud. It was a healthy, beloved business that was deliberately taken apart by the math of a leveraged buyout. Subscribe.